So we're going to begin tonight with an open mic with some members of the community. I would like to welcome to the microphone Machi.
Hello, everybody. My name is Machi, and I just wanted to say I was born and raised on the very far southeast side of Chicago. The neighborhood is referred to as South Chicago. One of the neighborhoods to the north was Bush. So just in case anybody's not familiar with the Bush, I'm referring to a neighborhood. And so I was born in the 50s, so these are experiences or events that I witnessed as I was growing up in that area. Very multicultural neighborhood, a little bit of everything. The name of this piece is My Bed, Just Another Bed in the Hood. My bed is lonely without the affection of my man. My bed is lukewarm without his body next to mine. My bed beckons a loyal and love sincere. My bed has been a sofa, a love seat, and a chair. My bed was a sidewalk on a cold autumn day, a blanket of grass beneath a favorite tree, the hallway stairs of a stranger, a patch of dirt under a porch. My bed was a worn-out sofa bed that slept five, where cat-sized rats ran through our basement flat, where shelves ached with pangs of hunger for a can of corn, where belongings were few and roaches too many, where government cheese, spoiled green, made tasty quesadillas for a bunch of hungry kids, where Ma, broken by abandonment, depressed in a devastated drunken stupor, left us alone for a year, where Dad in his greed and machismo took the settlement, didn't look back, but left with his new flavor of the month, where our heroin-addicted neighbor, Mr. Rodriguez, regularly beat his wife almost to her death, where Mrs. Rodriguez lay in a hospital by whom she was employed as a nurse, left to face co-workers while he beat their children closed fist, where Abuelita tried to check in on us from time to time, I think, where Ma's cousin Vera sometimes brought us a bag of canned goods, where Ma's childhood friend Julia brought a warm smile and heartfelt encouragement. Where at 16, I became the bad boy, Carlos Rodriguez's girlfriend, where he told stories of his hometown, the Big Apple, New York, New York, where he spoke of unfulfilled dreams of going back one day to open a hardware store like his favorite uncle, where in a fight defending his brother was murdered by a sawed-off shotgun, where across the street La Señora Ruiz, all alone, raised a brood of 9 kids, where her son, Phil, a close friend, aspired to higher education, a better life, where years later, after the birth of his daughter and tumultuous divorce, died of AIDS, where we all wore poverty like a second skin, where between tears we each told our stories of horror, where unfriendly gunshots flew freely in local dance halls, where in the middle of dancing teens, Danny Signs was shot dead, to the tune of a boogaloo, gorilla twist, or some such popular dance, where glue heads were shunned for the funk and stink they carried, while the rest of us got high on purple microdot, bennies, LSD, orange sunshine, hash, weed, purple haze, and peyote, where even this vast array of drugs available to us in the ghetto numbed our minds and painful memories but for a spell, or until we had money to take another trip to who knows where the hell. When revenge meant a sharp knife to the chest and a long drop down the nearest sewer. When a young 14-year-old girl was raped, beat black and blue, burned and dumped into a garbage can behind her mom's apartment. When a certain mother of 5 chose to beat, torture, and tie to a gas heater one of her 5 children, a daughter she most hated. When years after that poor girl was taken to Mexico by her dad, that poor mother was sent back to her family by a New York gangster in an old trunk where she had been chopped into a human fricassee. When to the west meant we could only go up to Commercial Avenue. When to the south meant we could only go up to the 92nd Street Bridge. When to the north meant we could only go up to the Bush train tracks. When, primarily African American, it was okay to cross streets east of Buffalo Avenue. When, if we dared to cross borders, we could open in the hood, mostly encountered by the boys, yet Bush was known to whoop many a Mexican, Puerto Rican, and black girl. When Johnny Walker, showing off his brand new car, sped down Buffalo Avenue, squeezed an ice cream truck in a parked car, crashed head on with my best friend, 8-year-old Becky's head. When the boom of his car against her head exploded like a bomb amidst a knowing silence by folks who understood justice would never exist for Becky. When in broad daylight, Juanita's dad beat his wife with a machete. When she and her siblings' pets were a shoebox of recently born mice. When her brother Charlie was run over several times by his loving girlfriend. When opportunities to progress were few and far between. When counselors and teachers said shit like, "You people will never amount to anything. Lumps a log, bunch of lumps on a log." When with shame we used food stamps to buy food and a medical card for a poorly administered exam by a doctor who never asked us, "How are you really?" How colorful gypsies read palms, cards to uncover secrets of the heart, and sold live chickens, goats, and an occasional pig out of their basement apartment. How Gladys, La Dama Cubana y Santera danced and prayed as she passed each house. Why is my bed lonely without the affection of a man? Why is it lukewarm without a body next to mine? My bed beckons a loyal and love sincere. My bed has been a sofa, a love seat, and a chair.
Thank you. Machi is a reader at one of our other events. We also have open mics at our monthly Palabra Pura, which happens just west of here on Division at La Bruquena Restaurant, and I invite you all to attend. Our next reader in the open mic, Maureen Connolly, please.
I'm going to read an excerpt from my novel. This is a character who wrote himself onto the page. Yeah, that's good. Thanks. Halfway through the novel, a 19-year-old boy, and then I had to honor him. Lonnie scowled. Thanksgiving, not a holiday for the Indians. Deer hunting week in Wisconsin, he'd miss out on that this year, and fishing season for the muskellunge. He thought about just taking a car in Alma. Those people were so wide open, they almost deserved it. No one locked their doors. They left cars sitting in driveways, keys in them, so whoever wanted to use the car next could just get in and go. Instead, he found a beater dumped on the reservation, hiked up the front wheels, and souped up the engine. He covered the bumper sticker with one from his grandmother, which said, Menominee Power. A week ago, he'd helped a stranded driver, then sped away, feeling good about having his own wheels, until that cop pulled him over and took his driver's license. But it had been easy to forge and copy another license in the copy shop, in full view of the lazy clerk. Last night, he'd gone out drinking with dudes from the reservation. It had been fine until that white guy started mocking him, insulting his people. The guy pushed with his sly, mean words until Lonnie had to jump him. Then, because the smartass was a big guy, he'd beaten the hell out of Lonnie, including giving him the blue-black shiners sprouting around his eye. He glanced at the car mirror, the black eye, his dark hair slicked back into a ponytail. Round his neck, the bronze feather engraved with symbols that had belonged to his father. Damn. He hoped the border police wouldn't make a big deal out of the eye. They'd already targeted him because he was an Indian. He felt like hell. He'd ended the evening screwing the girl who stayed in the shack on the edge of the reservation. The shack stank of poverty, but the girl was better than nothing. He could still taste the cheap wine and cigarettes. Deer suddenly stood in the road just ahead. He jumped, then swerved the car to avoid hitting the fawn who walked behind its mother. Animals. His grandmother's dog. Now he was something. That mutt tried to go Romeo on any bitch that moved, which ought to have been hard, him having only 3 legs and all. Lonnie grinned. He didn't know what had come over him, but he'd gone and made the miserable mutt a cart to get around on. He surprised himself when he'd done it. His grandmother'd be okay. She was too sick to help anyway. He took a drag on his cigarette. He'd never known his mother. She'd been a boozer, they said, had taken off for the city when he was just a baby. If there ain't nobody in your corner, what are you gonna do? Time to move on. He was tired of living in a rundown, seedy motel, no job, nothing to do in town or on the reservation. Tired of having time on his hands. Did other people ever have time on their hands? At least now he was doing something, heading for Canada. There were Indians there who bowed to no white man. Maybe he could fix cars or television. He was good at that. Or win money and parlay it into something big. Those pasty-faced high rollers didn't have to be the only ones making a killing. He was done with white men, their lies, their constant talk about money, the dead look in their eyes. White women were not so bad. He could see it in their eyes, the confusion, the beseeching, the knowing of the lies. He rolled down the car window and threw out his most raggedy t-shirt. A girl alongside the road wearing a baseball cap, breasts spilling out of her skimpy pink top, stood and stared. He stopped for a beer in Minnesota. On television, women leaned against cars and cleaned toilets as usual. On the road again, a car ahead of him speeded up on the yellow, almost hit someone crossing the road. He touched his right middle finger where it bent the wrong way from the time his grandfather crushed it to the ground with a rifle butt. No. He fingered his amulet. Sometimes it was like all that shone in him was under muddy water. It still felt like things floated away from him, but his life had taken a turn. Could be he'd gotten his mojo. He was making time now. Clouds banked overhead, gunmetal gray, sunshine glinting around their edges. He lit his last cigarette. He liked to use up the last of something, even Beulah. When he saw her dark eyes for the first time, he felt pure, like looking into a curving river you could see clean to the bottom of, but never know where it would end. He wanted the wildness and beauty inside those eyes. A small truck with antlers jammed under the grill taunted him by tapping the back of his beater. In the rear view mirror, he recognized the asshole wearing the NRA belt buckle from back at the bar. It got colder. He stopped hearing the sound of the car tires turning on the road. Cars around him slowed down. What for? The road looked clear. He put his foot on the accelerator. Thing is, you gotta keep on going and go fast. It's like a game. You gotta roll your dice big. On the bridge, the small truck passed him, sliding on the road. Lonnie braked suddenly to avoid hitting him. The beater skidded and spun toward the embankment. He thought about his birch bark canoe, the proud Menominee, the woods and streams. Just before he went over the edge, a fierce and beautiful light swam before his eyes, a light he had never seen before, but that he knew. He thought he heard a bell, then a faint, high sound like music, only better, like the sound of the wind in the trees at home. Then the car went over the side. The car soared for a long moment before it catapulted down the embankment. Lonnie felt himself soar too, aloft in the cold, clear air, high above, looking down on all the mess below. The wind blew in through the open windows. He held onto his life, all that it meant or could have meant. Then he let it go. I'm out of here. The old jalopy bumped and flew end over end down the steep embankment. He was free.
Thank you, Maureen. I'm glad that that character wrote himself onto the page, and I look forward to hearing more of that novel. Thank you. Our final open mic reader, Donna Pecor. And I have to say that I'm excited to learn today that Donna has her first book of poetry coming out this October. So that's very good news. Donna Pecor.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Guild. I'm glad to be here today. I came for the workshop earlier, and it was on using our city spaces to learn from and how to shape them and bring people to use them to a better capacity. When I first met John, it was at a workshop where he had us go out into the street and pick up things off the sidewalk, right? And we had to write. We had no idea what we were picking up. Just little pieces of this and that, glass or whatever, and bring it back to the classroom and then write something inspired by what we brought back. So today we had this giant blow-up thing that was to inspire us to think about creating space and making use of space. So to keep in theme kind of with the thought of how our spaces we can learn from our space, and just like the poems that were in story that was just we just heard, it's how our life, our city, our spaces impact us. How the young man, the Menominee, my children are Menominee. I was really excited to hear that, and how our neighborhoods, our stories impact us. So mine is just a simple little piece on edification. It's been no more time blabbering. Here's the poetry. Edification. Everything teaches. Things that teaches teaching. Everything one needs to know. No one needs above another. One needs another day, another way, another change to change the syntax that writes the way we relate to relationships between two. Between one with the world's ways, because all works well as we realize we are all one. And the same, and we dance. Salsa, rock and waltz, bop, boogie, tango, foxtrot, limbo, disco, bachata, techno moves a ballet to the same syncopated rhythm of the choreographed steps, at times repeated again until we get the timing right.
Thank you, Donna. I think your timing was right. And thank you all for being here. This is a pretty fantastic thing. We are assembled outside to hear a reading, so thank you all for being here tonight. We're going to get started with the feature readers. So the theme tonight is broken windows. And the idea of broken windows comes from a social theory that if you have a part of a town that has a lot of boarded up windows and broken windows and litter and graffiti, that it invites a certain element, or it perhaps invites crime, or that it's a dangerous community. And that social theory later expanded into the idea of zero tolerance policing, and the idea that there might be unwanted individuals or groups of people within any community because of how the community felt, regardless of whether or not we might think if a person belongs within a community by their own self-identity with that community. So this notion of broken windows was an interesting notion for me to bring to the readers, to ask our readers to somehow identify with an idea of the human story at the intersection of architecture and the urban plan. So I'm very excited to introduce our first reader tonight, who is going to give us, as I understand, a little bit of history of this actual physical space. His name is Paul DeRica. And you're going to clap even more when you hear that he has things about him, like an MFA in creative writing from the University of Michigan. Forgive me for going through people's bios, but it's good stuff. And he has a PhD in English from the University of Chicago. His writing has appeared in Poetry, The Chicagoan, Tin House, Mid-American Review, and Indiana Review, among other places. And with Bill Savage, he edited Chicago by Day and Night, The Pleasure Seeker's Guide to the Paris of America. Paul is the founder of Pocket Guide to Hell, a series of free and interactive talks, walks, and reenactments that deal with Chicago's past. Please welcome Paul DeRica.
Thank you, John, and thank you to the Guild. Uh-oh, is this great? Okay. I'll slouch a little bit. Is this good? Can everybody hear me? We've got the fountain in the background. All right. Thank you to the Guild, Literary Complex, and to Soiled, and also to the Polish Triangle Coalition for putting together this event. So I'm going to give a sort of short talk, kind of bookended by passages from two different books that hopefully will kind of resonate with what I have to say. The first is by Jane Jacobs, The Death and Life of Great American Cities, which was published in 1961. Anybody out there ever read this book? Countered it before? Some people, maybe, maybe not. The second is Nelson Algren's Chicago City on the Make, which came out a decade prior in 1951. Most of you are standing directly in front of the Nelson Algren fountain, and you'll see a quotation from this work at the base of that fountain. So I'm going to start with Jane Jacobs and then launch into my talk. Now, Jane Jacobs was very interested in kind of preserving the sort of vitality and sort of life of city neighborhoods, right? And she thought that a key way of preserving this vitality was by producing sort of diverse neighborhoods. And she said that there were 4 conditions that had to be in place for a neighborhood to be sufficiently diverse and thus sufficiently vibrant and alive. And so one of these conditions she called the need for aged buildings. So I'm just going to read from the beginning of this chapter and then launch into talking about this neighborhood. It's crazy to be doing out here. All right. Cities need old buildings so badly it is probably impossible for vigorous streets and districts to grow without them. By old buildings, I mean not museum piece old buildings, not old buildings in an excellent and expensive state of rehabilitation, although these make fine ingredients, but also a good lot of plain, ordinary, low-value old buildings, including some run-down old buildings. If a city area has only new buildings, the enterprises that can exist there are automatically limited to those that can support the high costs of new construction. These high costs of occupying new buildings may be levied in the form of rent, or they may be levied in the form of an owner's interest, or amortization payments on the capital costs of the construction. However the costs are paid off, they have to be paid off. And for this reason, enterprises that support the cost of new construction must be capable of paying a relatively high overhead, high in comparison to that necessarily required by old buildings. To support such high overheads, the enterprises must be either A, high profit, or B, well subsidized. So, I really enjoy kind of being here at the Triangle and being at this particular intersection because if you look behind you, you can see a nice sort of juxtaposition between a very, very new building, so new it hasn't opened, and a very, very old building. Now, the new building that you see here stands 11 stories tall. It's going to be a mixed sort of live and work space. Cultural organizations will be able to kind of occupy some of the floors. The lower levels, unless this has changed, I've been told, will have a bank and also a coffee shop. And you can see, too, the mixture of the sort of glass and metal plays nicely with the light there. Now, I'm not sure how this area will mark the opening of this building when it does open, but I can tell you about the opening of the building across the street from it, what is today the CVS Pharmacy, and also a restaurant as well, the Bedford. So I want to take you guys back, all the way back to the 15th of August, 1934. On that day, 3,000 people gathered right where you're standing to commemorate the opening of the Milwaukee Avenue National Bank. Now this was a big occasion for one reason, because the Milwaukee Avenue National Bank was not the first tenant of that building. No, the first tenant of that building was an institution known as the Northwestern Trust and Savings Bank, which started all the way back in 1906 by a man named John Smolsky. And Smolsky must have seen what was on the horizon, what was coming, because he opted out permanently in 1928 in the Seneca Hotel. And just a couple years later, in 1931, the Northwestern Trust and Savings Bank failed. And this was a huge deal because at the time, it was the largest Polish financial institution, not only in the country, but in the world. But did the Polish community that was living here in what was Wicker Park give up in the midst of the Depression? Did they give into despair? No, they pooled all their resources, they formed a new bank, they got the guy who was the Assistant Secretary of the Treasury during the Calvin Coolidge administration, which given what the Coolidge economic policies eventually led to may have been a questionable choice. But anyhow, they got him, a man by the name of Charles Dewey, to be the president of this new bank. And there was a mover and shaker in the neighborhood by the name of Pete Rostenkowski. You might be more familiar with his grandson. He was the head of the Polish Roman Catholic Union, mentioned on that little plaque over there, and he helped to organize a big ceremony to kind of kick off the opening of the bank. And this wasn't just a bank, right? It was also a kind of cultural center for the neighborhood. They would have art shows here, right? They would have readings here and cultural events. The upper floors would be like doctor's offices and dentist offices. I've been told a crazy story by a guy whose dad used to sell medical supplies. And he remembers coming here before, the fall of the Iron Curtain and selling medical supplies to Polish doctors who were trying to get those devices through the Iron Curtain and back to Poland. Really interesting, sort of fascinating space and very important to this community. And the Polish community at that time really thought that with the opening of this building, they were making a kind of permanent mark on the neighborhood, right? That they would always be here and always present. But a sort of look at the sort of longer history of this area suggests that it's always been in flux, and it's often been the home of neighborhoods and communities that have felt in some ways like displaced from the larger city. So let's just start by kind of looking at what forms the triangle, right? And the sort of history of that. You got Ashland Avenue, which weirdly enough is named for the estate of a Kentucky statesman, or named for the estate of a Kentucky statesman, Henry Clay. You've got Milwaukee, which is one of the oldest, avenues in the city, right? It's built on an old Native American trail, and rather, its name is somewhat unimaginative because basically it would lead you all the way up to Milwaukee. And then you've got Division. And what I find really interesting about Division is no two historians can ever agree on what the origin of its name is, right? Nobody knows where it comes from. Ashland, we know we got Henry Clay's estate. Milwaukee, because it goes to Milwaukee. But Division is a bit of a mystery. And Division historically has served as a kind of migration trail of its own for communities and groups of people that were living in other parts of the city, usually neighborhoods to the east, that got pushed here either through natural calamities, gentrification, urban renewal, or whatever. So as I said, the Poles were not the first. When the brothers Wicker laid out the neighborhood that would become Wicker Park in 1870, they were in some ways the fortunate sons of historical accident, because 1 year later, the Great Chicago Fire, this is in 1871, would wipe out 3/4 of the city. And the large German population, as well as some Scandinavians who'd been living around Lincoln Park and Old Town, would be forced into the lots here that the brothers Wicker had laid out, and they would form a sort of robust German community. Now, many of these Germans themselves had been displaced at one time or the other. Lots of them were either revolutionaries from the failed conflicts of 1848, a weird mixture of social democrats and socialists and anarchists who had been forced to emigrate to the United States after their revolutions failed. Others were sort of mainstream, respectable businessmen. And one thing that was fascinating about the German community in the 1870s to the 1880s is that on Hoyne Street, you might have the mansions of the beer barons, right? Even though these were affluent families, they couldn't settle where the more sort of northeast and Yankee families had their mansions farther east in Chicago because they were German, and in some cases Catholic. But then you also had a whole series of middle-class and working-class Germans settling here as well. And in fact, five of the 5 men who died or were put on trial and executed in connection to the Haymarket bombing called Wicker Park their home. So in November 1887, when the funeral was held for these men, 4 of them were executed, a 5th committed suicide in prison. The funeral procession stopped at each of the houses in the neighborhood and then processed down Milwaukee Avenue to points farther west in Forest Park where they are buried today. Supposedly, an equal number of people as showed up for the bank dedication, around 3,000 people, showed up to watch this funeral procession. So at one point, Wicker Park was the home of German anarchists, right? Well, let's go back, but even at that time, right, as that was happening in 1886, there were about 40,000 Poles who had moved into the neighborhood. And their numbers would increase over time, moving the Germans farther out. So by 1903, you've got 250,000 Poles. By 1929, just a couple years before that bank gets rededicated, you've got about 400,000 Poles. And then between the late 30s through the early 1950s, you'd have about 150,000 displaced people moving over from Europe as a result of the Second World War and also calling this neighborhood home. So huge Polish community here by 1950. And I want to tell you one anecdote about the bank before I kind of move farther west between these 2 buildings along Division. So in 1948, this is a true story, something that doesn't often make the history books, there was a man by the name of James Henley. He lived in Wabansia. He came into the bank and he wanted to deposit exactly $515, all in dimes. I kid you not. Now, the bank employees got a little suspicious of this. They were like, why does this guy have $515 worth of dimes? So they called the police, and it turns out that Henley had stolen all of the dimes from his brother-in-law, who apparently had a dime collection. But nobody ever asked, why the brother-in-law had, a whole collection of dimes and 515 of them. But that's the sort of story that one of this neighborhood's residents, as of 1948, would have latched onto, and that was a writer by the name of Nelson Algren. And Algren became obsessed moving up and down what was then known as the Polish Broadway of Division Street, kind of collecting stories, going into the different bars and restaurants and so forth. And it's claimed that if you were just to walk west all the way to Damon, you'll find an old bar by the name of the Rainbow. It was claimed that Algren would take his then partner by the name of Simone to that bar, and they would kind of have drinks and hang out and see some of the shows and so forth. And it was actually, right near the Rainbow, back, right immediately at that intersection at Damon and Division, where in 1968, another important event in Wicker Park's history will have occurred. So even as Algren is sitting there in the bar with Simone, the neighborhood's changing, right? And then the Poles that had been here and thought by putting this bank and other structures here that their claim on this neighborhood was permanent, they're starting to be moved out as well. And moving in is a large Puerto Rican community, which has been displaced because of urban renewal policies in Lincoln Park area. I don't know what it is about this neighborhood's connection to Lincoln Park, but it seems like people are always coming from Lincoln Park and moving in to Wicker Park. So 1966, it's a hot June night. There's 2 officers on patrol by the name of Munyon and Howard. And right near the Rainbow, they see an altercation between 3 young Puerto Rican men. They go to break it up, and one of the young men, he may have been 17, he may have been 19. It's interesting how accounts can never sort of, fix these sorts of facts. According to the officers, pulls a gun out of his sock. Before he can actually pull it out, one of the officers fires at him, and this young man by the name of Cruz gets shot in the leg. And then almost immediately, the neighborhood erupts in violence. This is 1966, 2 years between the sort of big violence of 1968. But the whole neighborhood here, basically from Division and Damon and points west on Division, erupts, right? And this rioting will go on for several days. On the first night, 44 people will get arrested. It goes on for a second night, 44 more people get arrested. 7 people end up getting shot. businesses are burned, cars are overturned, there's chaos. But what it does is it focuses the city's attention on yet another sort of like displaced, sort of marginalized community within the city that's now calling Wicker Park home. And as a result of that, the city begins to pay more attention to sort of the educational and economic needs of the Puerto Rican community here. And the Puerto Rican community itself begins to coalesce more. Various kind of cultural organizations take shape. Activist organizations take shape. And even though, like the Poles, they're not able to lay a permanent claim on Wicker Park, they do, move farther west into Humboldt Park and turn that into the sort of vibrant and cultural area that it is today. Now, through this whole period, from 66 onward, the neighborhood's continuing to shift, continuing to kind of go downhill, at least economically, right? You still have some old Poles. You maybe have the stray German here or there. You've got some Puerto Ricans. And then let's go back to the Rainbow in 1985, because that's when its owner, a woman by the name of Rose, who used to own the bar with her husband, John. They bought it all the way back in 36. And John, who's nicknamed Ziggy, actually built a stage in the bar for his wife, so that she could play her accordion and perform at the bar. And you can still see that stage today. He went to San Francisco, saw a bar with a similar design there, and brought the carpenter from the West Coast back to Chicago so he could build this stage for his wife. So Rose, she owns this bar all the way from 36 to 1985, when she sells it to two cats by the name of Gavin and Dee. And they're the start of the next sort of change in Wicker Park's history, right? So Gavin and Dee decide that they're going to let their friends who are artists start to put their artwork up on the wall. And they're going to let the friends who are musicians hang out there and occasionally play there. And they're part of a whole sort of group of kind of like bars and restaurants and cafes that began to spring up. And so now the cool kids have moved in to Wicker Park, right? And there's a U of C sociologist who calls the area a neo-bohemia, right? And by 1996, MTV's here, and they're filming The Real World in a building that's now a Cheetah Gym. I kid you not. And these kids, they're the sons and daughters and grandsons and granddaughters, the Poles and Germans who had lived here once before, and other folks. And so they're here, and they create this kind of cultural scene, right? And this kind of cultural mix. And that reminds me of, so if you were to go west on Division, like three of my sort of favorite spaces, and I think this is, true of a lot of neighborhoods, right? Like restaurants come and go, businesses come and go, banks fail, new buildings rise. But some of the oldest establishments in any given neighborhoods always turn out to be the bars. And for me, there's a kind of a holy trinity of bars on Division streets. You've got the Rainbow, which I've already talked about, which dates to 36 and has seen all these changes. You've got Phyllis's Musical Inn, where the owner, Clem, the bar's named after his mom, Phyllis, another accordion-playing Polish woman. Clem would allow any band that wanted a chance to play there for free. He still owns the place now. And of course, the Gold Star as well. Another one of those bars that dates all the way back to the 30s and hung in there through the Algren 50s up until the present. And if you were to turn up at the Gold Star anywhere between 1990 and the next 21 some years, you might meet a woman who would often be bartending there. She was the daughter of the owner. Her name was Susan. She was one of those amazing sort of neighborhood bartenders. You might go in there just once and she would like recognize you if you ever went in there again, right? Recognize your face. You go in there more than once, and this is what I'm told by locals. I never actually got a chance to meet her. She would remember your name, right? And who you were. And she really helped to create a sort of sense of community along with these other places out of all these sort of displaced kids coming from the suburbs or elsewhere. And as I said, Susan stayed the bartender for 21 years until she became ill, and then the community kind of rallied around her to help with her medical expenses. They had fundraisers, local businesses, local artists donated things. When she got sicker, they threw more fundraisers, and when she finally passed, they memorialized her and kind of honored her legacy. Now, one thing that I really liked about like kind of learning about her and also knowing the bars, that apparently she really loved cats, right? So not only did she take care of the kids within the neighborhood, but, she fed and adopted and sheltered and found homes for all the cats, which weirdly enough kind of ties her back to Algren, who also had a very sort of sympathetic, attachment to cats. Not only, when he'd sign his books, he would also often draw a cartoon of a cat as well, which I find kind of interesting. So Susan's passing, though, in some ways, it's been less than a year. That was in December of 2012, and in some ways it marks yet another kind of change in some ways. You've probably noticed there are kind of fewer cool kids here than before, right? They've done the things that cool kids have always done, which is followed the cheaper rents. So usually northwest, up Milwaukee, some points south. The former Pope of Wicker Park, for those of you who might know who he is now the mayor of Bridgeport. So things change. But one thing that stayed consistent, right, throughout this whole period, this whole sort of long history of the Polish Triangle and Division Street west of it, is the fact that there's always been these pigeons here, right? They've always been kind of witness to all the different changes and transformations, right? And the pigeons, they see who comes, they see who goes. They've seen the Germans come and go. They've seen the Poles come and go. They've seen the Puerto Ricans. They've seen the hipsters come and go. And now, they're looking at who's coming out of the blue line. They're seeing a lot more shirts and ties. They're seeing a lot more dresses that aren't thrifted, but are kind of costly. And they might be asking themselves, who's next? And, the pigeons, and also what, Nelson Algren called the nameless, useless nobodies, they always generally have a better sense than a lot of the people living in a neighborhood about what's coming next and who's coming next. But they're looking and they're seeing who's coming next. And for the first time, perhaps they don't have an answer, but they know who's on the way out. And so I'm going to end with a quote from Nelson Algren, because Nelson Algren, after whom that fountain is named, is perhaps the only person in this long, long history of Wicker Park to probably take any note of the pigeons or any note of what society might call the nobodies and kind of inscribe them into that history. He was the only one to sort of notice their presence, and perhaps would, if he were alive today, be the only one to notice their absence and at least ruminate on it a little bit. So this is a passage from City on the Make, which, as I said, that quotation comes from. And here he's talking about this neighborhood. And I'm using his language here, so this isn't suggesting necessarily my own thoughts. The nameless, useless nobodies who sleep behind the taverns, who sleep beneath the L, who sleep in burnt-out buses with the windows freshly curtained, in winterized chicken coops or patched-up truck bodies, the useless, helpless nobodies nobody knows, that go as the snow goes, where the wind blows, there and there and there, down any old cat and ashcan alley at all. There, unloved and lost forever, lost and unloved for keeps in a day. There, far below the ceaseless flow of TV waves and FM waves, way, way down there where no one has yet heard of phone vision nor considered the wonders of Technicolor video. There below the miles and miles of high-tension wires servicing the miles and miles of low-pressure cookers. There where they sleep on someone else's pool table in someone else's hall or someone else's jail. There where they chop kindling for heat, cook over coal stoves, still burn kerosene for light. There where they sleep the all-night movies through and wait for rain or peace or snow. There beats Chicago's heart. There, unheard by the millions who ride the waves above and sleep and dream, night after night after night, loving and well-beloved, guarding and well-guarded, beats the great city's troubled heart. Thanks.
Thank you, Paul. If I have a question about anything, I might ask you. Thank you. Our next reader, Maribel Mers, is an author, educator, and organizer. She is a founding member of the Division Collective, a salon series featuring emerging writers, artists, musicians, architects, designers, and thinkers, of which I have enjoyed many versions. She is also the co-creator of Kid City Chicago, and her writing explores the cultural and regional identity of Mexican-American families. Maribel?
I'd like to do that. Thank you. That's good. Actually, maybe a little bit lower. Sorry. There we go. Hello, my name is Maribel Miras, and my tie to this neighborhood actually started in about 1990, where I'd come up around about 5 years old with my mom, and we'd shop down Milwaukee at wholesale shops, and we'd bring it down to the southwest side and sell it. So we would resell the items from up here. I'm going to read a little bit of stories from the southwest side. So I grew up in the southwest side. It would be the Orange Line Kedzie heading southbound. That's the area that I'm talking about. And my stories date around 1990 to 1998. Having difficulty with pages. Okay. The Grandpa. A tall iron gate reinforced with sheet metal encloses the gangway. The gate sign says, "No, you can't come in." "Yes, there is something inside." "No, you can't see it." "No, you can't steal from us." "Get off my lawn." A small hole by the lock reveals the inside. There is a sidewalk, the brick of the building, leaves from the trees, flowers sticking out, tires stacked, a metal cart, planters, rods, and boards. I can see my grandpa in the yard at the grill. We bang on the gate. "Abuelito, Abuelito, let us in! We can smell the steak cooking! This neighborhood smells like carne asada." He walks over and unlocks the gate. My cousin Christy, Eddie, Pedro, and I walk through the gangway peering at the scrap metal, a shop cart, bikes, a dolly, a TV, and stacks of tires. Grandpa's grilling in his junkyard garden. He does this. He buys meat and a package of tortillas at the corner store and grills in the yard alone. We plead, "Can we have some meat, Abuelito?" He throws 4 tortillas on the grill, puts the meat on top, and hands us each a taco. We devour them. Eddie asks us if we've ever gone to the thrift store with Grandpa. We say no. He says he'll buy you toys. A few days later, we are playing in the front of the 2-flat when we see Grandpa's bright blue pickup truck pull to the corner with Eddie in the passenger seat, waving goodbye. Pedro yells, "He's going to the thrift store!" We run towards the truck, screaming, "Abuelito, Abuelito, wait!" My grandpa stops. Christy, Pedro, and I cram into the bench seat. We didn't even tell Abuelito we were leaving. At the unique thrift store, we watch Grandpa look at appliances. He lets us roam the aisles alone. Eddie was right. He buys us clear plastic grab bags filled with toys. He buys Christy and me big colorful plastic necklaces from the display case up front. My grandpa is a don, not a mister or a senor. He is a don, Don Baldelio, the head of the Herrera family. Don Baldelio, the tone is friendly yet formal and respectful to express his seniority, wisdom, and respect. Only few men can be called a don because don is the highest formal title a Mexican man can ever have. My grandpa is a don, but you would never know this if you saw him walking or driving around Chicago. My grandpa is the junk man of the neighborhood. I've never known him to have any other job. He rides around in his bright blue Ford pickup truck with welded metal rails and wooden walls. He rides around Whipple, Troy, Albany, Kedzie. He'll even go down to 26th Street and then back up to 63rd Street. Sometimes people contract him to move refrigerators for them. He finds, buys, trades, and sells machines like compressors, air tanks, and saws. Everything is stored in his junkyard garden. He can fix anything. He works on cars, snakes sinks, makes and fixes bikes. We use the best bikes before he sells them at the flea market. Teenagers from the neighborhood bang on the gate. They shout, "Está Don Baldelio?" We shout back, "No, he's not here," even though he is. He's famous for repairing bikes. We always tell him he's famous. He is one of those men standing outside of the grocery stores, handing out religious pamphlets. He wears brown polyester pants, a yellow collared shirt with exposed white tank tops. He smells like sweat, mouthwash, and Bengay cream. He stands tall and strong, giving the pamphlets without speaking. I have no idea what religion he is. I just know that he has his own religion and we have ours. Whenever we make tamales, the grown-ups gather around my grandmother's kitchen table and argue about Jesus. They are always begging, waving their hands for Grandpa to understand. But my grandpa is always shaking his head, saying, El Señor says this, and El Señor says that. And the whole time he is getting respect. But they plead with him, Pero Don Baldelio, but Papa, but nothing. I went to his church once. It reminded me of black churches on TV that my cousins and I make fun of. We stand in the front of the TV screaming, Praise Lord! Praise the Lord! Praise Jesus! And we slam each other down on the couch in fake convulsions. Then pop up singing, Amen! Amen! Clapping and dancing. Except Grandpa's church speaks Spanish. Grandpa's church gathers at night on Wednesdays. He showers, dresses up in an old light polyester suit, and puts his shiny dark sunglasses on. Every Wednesday night, Grandpa's brother rings the doorbell and says, Is Brother Herrera ready? I tell Grandpa his brother Manuel is waiting for him downstairs, and he walks out with his guitar. Brother Manuel is not his real brother, but he belongs to the same church. Grandpa plays bass in the church band. He plays the same tune over and over. Dun 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 dun. And wails some words with the band. After church, he eats sweet bread and drinks café con leche, then goes to sleep in his own bed in his own room. My grandmother says she can't sleep in the same bed with Grandpa because they can't share the blanket. My mom says it's because Abuelito was once a very bad man. I believe both, because when I sleep with Grandma, she uses separate blankets, and I feel like we're dying when we are praying so hard for help and forgiveness. The only bad thing I ever saw my grandpa do was beat my cousin Juanito with the belt in the doorway of the pantry. Juanito was in trouble for hanging out with Little Temper and the Pee-wee Lion Kings on our front porch. Temper gave Eddie a wedgie in front of the Pee-wees, my cousin and our neighbors and our friends. He pulled his underpants so high, Eddie was bungee jumping. Crystal said she never laughed so hard in her life. Grandpa yelled at the Pee-wees and told them to leave. He scolded the neighborhood kids for being with those little gangsters, and he sent them upstairs to the apartment. He whipped Juanito with his belt, and Juanito laughed and laughed as he was being hit. The laughter made my grandfather furious, so then he brought out the large leather belt and held Juanito by the shirt and beat him until he was red on the back, the face, and finally crying. I watched, and I didn't feel bad because Juanito didn't have a pa to teach him, and Grandpa is the grandpa. My mom owns a store. It's the corner of 52nd and Kedzie. We sell Lovely Girl, Carnival Creations, Exquisite Form, and Puerto Chico. Except we stopped selling Puerto Chico after our distributor had a heart attack and died. Stretch, spandex, small, medium, extra, extra large, 42 double D, and one size fits all. Black, white, and beige lycra. We close on Sundays. This is called Little Temper. The gangsters in this neighborhood wear their jeans baggy, with back pockets down low and mustard gold hoodies that look like long, draping robes. Their colors are black and gold, and their symbols are crowns and numbers scribbled on the walls. Old English 5s and 3s, 53 like the street. They are Latin kings, or trying to be. They are the shadows of this neighborhood. They stand around like they own this block. A black couple once pulled up to the corner. The boyfriend waited in the car and left the car running. His girlfriend was pretty. She stepped out and headed toward Don Pan Bakery. But she was startled by a gangster who came around the corner yelling, "Get the fuck out of our hood, you black bitch!" With fury in his eyes, waving his arms up, stepping towards her like he was going to beat her down. "Bitch, I own this block!" Her eyes bugged out and her arms flailed as she walked backwards toward the car, turning fast to open the door. The tires screeched and the black couple sped away. I don't know why he did that. All she wanted was some pan. These gangsters, they think they own this block, walking around, standing around on stoops, recognizing people, shouting, "King Love, 2-6 Killer," to represent whoever they love or whoever they hate. I don't know any of them, just of them. Little Temper was in the 2nd grade with me. He was a funny brown kid who looked Asian, but he could be Mexican. I don't know. All I know is he couldn't read very well. He was a troublemaker. He flung spoonfuls of mashed potatoes on the chalkboard, then slid it up so that when the teacher pulled it down the next day, the potatoes would be clumped on, rock hard, and the whole class would laugh. His sister was nice. One time he told the teacher he didn't have to read because his sister would read the whole book to him at night, out loud. She won the science fair. I don't remember what happened to him after 2nd grade. I heard he was a Pee Wee Lion King by the time we were in 7th grade. One day I went to throw the garbage out in the alley, and down about 3 houses was a dumpster overflowing with old furniture, clothes, and pictures. I picked one up and saw my neighbor and an old woman hugging 2 boys at a party that looked like Easter or a birthday. It was Temper, in a white graduation cap and gown, a big smile, and his tiny white teeth sticking out. On the back it said Brian, age 5, kindergarten. I forgot his name was Brian. I go to school in this neighborhood, but I don't live here. My mom owns a small store on 52nd and Kedzie, and this school is close to my mom's store and close to Abuelita's house. But soon I'll be graduating and I'll go to a private high school in a different neighborhood. In the 7th grade, I sat next to a gangster who was held back and looked like a man. He already had a mustache and was all tall and fat. He hides weed in his shoe. Sometimes he makes me laugh, or if I don't laugh, he punches my arm and says, "Laugh," then it makes him laugh. And then he threatens to burn my store down. One day, the class was laughing at him for making a mistake, and I laughed too. He got mad and said, "Yeah, I know who you are. You're that girl that owns a store in the corner. I've seen you there. I'll burn your store down for laughing, just like I burned the cats down the alley." I did get a little scared because he was capable of doing it. I heard he sent cats screaming down the alley because he thought it was funny. But I didn't know him. But I didn't let him have that power over me. Quickly I said, "Oh yeah? Oh yeah? Go ahead. I'll only get richer. I own that building. I have insurance. I'll just make more money if you do that." He had a dumb look on his face and then said, "Oh," and tilted his head and went back to his worksheet. My mother has a store at 52nd and Kedzie. Don Pan's Bakery is right around the corner. The head of the Latin Queens lives at the apartment above Don Pan's Bakery. They call themselves ladies. I never knew there were lady queens, let alone a head lady queen, until they moved into that apartment. She's old, I've seen her. I thought the head of the queens would be the most beautiful girl of them all because all the queens are the finest girls with the nicest hairs and the pretty frowns. They stand hard and hardly smile when they're together talking, and they laugh all loud and rowdy. The queens wear dark makeup, but fine-ass makeup according to the guys. Gold jewelry, nice sneakers, and crisp track jackets worn half-zip with their boobs all squished up. And my friends only wish we could have boobs like that one day, but no dark makeup because that's cha-cha girl and hoochie-style makeup. The head lady queen looks like a witch. Her hair is long and brittle with gray mixed with brown. Her skin is wrinkly. She wears glasses sometimes when she walks out of the building. She wears tracksuits like the girls. Except on her, it just looks bummy, like she's wearing pajamas in the street. She has the nicest Nikes, and she's always smoking and coughing. Her voice is raspy, and I think she's someone's mother. Across the street, and 2 storefronts south of my mom's store, is Angel's Funeral Home. Whenever there are a lot of people outside, a young person has died, especially if those people outside are young themselves. We closed the store early those days because it could be dangerous. It could be a gang funeral because my mom says all that sadness isn't good for business. The only time I had to call 911 was for a gang funeral. I've always thought about calling 911, but in my fantasy it was about a fire. I'd be the calm kid who was being interviewed on the 6 o'clock news for saving some old lady and her cat, possibly the old lady queen next door. She'd come out of the apartment with her hair all fried and sticking up with a cigarette in her hand, and the cops would be shown pulling out young boys in mountains of charred up tracksuits. But that's not how it happened. The day I called was a spring day. We were all busy with the customers because the weather was nice and everyone was outside. At 4 o'clock, a large crowd gathered outside the funeral home. I was near the back room of the store when I started to hear loud popping sounds like fireworks coming closer and closer. I yelled to my mom, "I got your ticket, spot on!" She crouched down low under the crawl space by the dressing room. I grabbed the phone and carefully punched 911. Surprisingly calm, I said, "There have been shots fired up and down the street at 5207 South Kedzie." The voice on the other end asked, "Were they driving?" "Yeah, I think so. I just heard it from up and down the streets." "Between what streets?" 53rd and 52nd. "Is this a business?" "Yes." "Police are on their way." When I hung up the phone, I thought, how did they know it was a business? I didn't even say it on the phone. I looked out the display window to watch the people in the street. The phone rang, and I picked up. A man at the other end said, "This is Channel 7 News. We heard that a shooting occurred outside your business. Can you give us any information?" I was shocked. The news was talking to me. I immediately got nervous and frantically said, Yeah, there were shots, and everyone was outside, and the cars are stopped. Here, talk to my cousin." The traffic was caused by a bus that stopped in the middle of the street. Because of the shots, a passenger, a woman 8 months pregnant, was in distress. She wasn't hurt, she was just stunned. No one was hurt. The police questioned the crowd who scattered into the funeral home. The funeral was for a king killed by a Tusiks in a king's neighborhood. A rival gang, presumably the Tusiks, drove by shooting. The lady with the pushcart who sells elotes on the corn cob with all the mayonnaise and the butter and the smelly cheese and the chili powder and lime. Her daughter is a ballerina downtown and her son was a gangster. One day, she parked her car outside of our store and came in to shop and talked to my mom. She told us, "You should close early on those gang funeral days. They're ruthless. They'll kill your children." Her son's funeral was there at Angel's Funeral Home. He was a gangster shot in a drive-by. However, he was armed and ready to shoot back when the rivals drove past shooting. They were shooting back and forth, and her boy was killed. The rival shooter from the car was wounded and had to have his arm amputated. The rival gang was so mad, they stormed in during her son's wake. A rival gang member started punching her dead son in the face and pulled him up from the casket, punching him, while the fellow gang members stood watch by side. The mother screamed in horror. Some men held her back. This small family stood there in shock as the gangsters walked out. The action happened so fast, they barely had time to grasp it, let alone call the police. The woman said, not one of his so-called gang family brothers were there to protect him. It was only us. I wanted to read this for my Uncle Joe because he just got out of heart surgery. Uncle Joe's spirograph. Uncle Joe lives with my grandma and grandpa, and he only speaks Spanish. He tries really hard to speak English when he is at work. He speaks survival English. Yes, okay, sorry, and thank you. He wears baseball caps, colorful t-shirts, and logo designs that he finds in thrift stores or plain white Fruit of the Loom t-shirts flannel jackets, Dickies, Air Force Blue work pants, and a belt that weighs down his pants to reveal his Fruit of the Loom underwear. He likes the brand Fruit of the Loom because of the funny, colorful cartoon fruits on the packaging. He wears white Fruit of the Loom tube socks and dark red Reebok sneakers. He looks like a man at work, even when he is at home, but relaxed and calm in moccasins. My grandma hangs his clothes on the line outside. He has lived at home with Grandma and Grandpa forever. He once worked in a laundromat on 53rd and Kedzie, mopping the floor. But now he's at UPS and Hodgkins, hauling boxes from the trailers to the conveyor belts. Sometimes I'm afraid of him being taunted for being slow, but then again, maybe other people don't think of him as slow like we do. He is a particular man. He likes to set up electronics and mechanical things to use them and to see how they work. He loves radios, television sets, remote controls, and telephones. He is interested in the vanity of owning the objects just as much as he is interested in the function of the object. He is known by people of this neighborhood, the 52nd block of Whipple. He is the man who can fix things, just like my grandpa. He likes to sit in his car and listen to his old ranchero music, Antonio Aguilar, Vicente Fernandez, and Spanish covers of Elvis Presley. He washes his car every week. He stacks his cassettes neatly in a case and decorates his dashboard with one little dog with a bobbing head because it makes him laugh. He reupholstered his car seats with woven rugs by tucking them around the cushions and installed extra cushions to make the ride more comfortable. He smells like his car, like engine oil and grease and a little bit of peppermint car air freshener. I love when he laughs. Sometimes I don't even know what he is laughing about or what he found so comical in a story that someone told or that he told himself, but he laughs loudly and quickly. Ha ha ha. He tells stories of people I don't know or haven't known in all my life, yet in fact are related to me. He knew them in Mexico. He says, in Cardenas, when he begins to tell a story, referring to the small rural town in Mexico where my family used to live before the 1960s. I don't know much about the town of Cardenas, but he goes on and on. Grandma knows his stories because these relationships are cultivated and maintained by phone and rooted in the past. Uncle Joe rarely goes to family parties and never dances. The only time he went to a party was for my sister Eliana's wedding. They struggled to keep him in their chair to groom his hair. They cut and styled his hair short, trimmed his eyebrows, shaved his beard, and made him scrub his whole body with the pumice stone in the bathtub. He looked like a different man. He looked younger and lighter. He likes to stay at home and listen to his music. He has notebooks, finely sharpened pencils, and stencils he uses to write his name over and over again until he fills the page. He writes family member and co-workers' names. Valeria, Eugenio, Thomas. He writes his own name over and over in capital letters for a whole 4 pages. Jose Herrera. Then he draws on a different page. He uses his spirograph toy, which has plastic gears in different shapes, circles, triangles, and lines. He uses the rings to make spirals that look 3D in different colors of pen, green, red, blue. They say he's loquito. They say he has never been right in the head or all there because my grandmother was spooked when she was pregnant with Joe. It was 1940 back in Mexico. She was pregnant and one day she heard a large explosion and shots and thought my grandpa was being shot at outside. She thought he had been killed. She was scared so bad that something happened to the baby inside her and Joe came out the way he did. Grandpa wasn't shot, but she was rattled with fear. Sometimes I think that's the only reason Grandma has lived as long as she has, because she has someone to take care of, feed, and tell what to do and when to do it. He sends him on errands. It's part of his daily life, his daily routine. Grandma sends him off to buy 1 pound of chicken, 1 pound of rice, a jar of mole, but only the mole of Doña Maria, and 2 packs of tortillas. He has to do it before 2 o'clock because that's when we will make lunch. It's as simple as calling him over to do you a favor. He will go to your house and move a stove or hook up a gas line if you ask him. And that is if Grandma pushes him enough the right way. He is mostly interested in going to your house to see what kind of gadgets you own and to show off any mechanical or electronic objects he just bought or fixed and compare them to your own. He works 4 hours a day, 5 days a week at UPS lifting boxes from a conveyor belt. Sometimes I worry it's too much weight for him to be lifting. I wonder if younger workers pick on him. I wonder if he sits alone at break time. Sometimes I want to sign up to work there just so I can sit with him at break time and be his friend. Maybe his coworkers will notice and say, "Oh, that's Joe's friend, that young girl over there." And maybe someone will want to be his friend too. One time my Uncle Johnny yelled at him, and it made me upset, made me feel bad, made me feel mad. We were helping Grandma into the car when my Uncle Joe ran up to the car to give Grandma her cane. Grandma was halfway into the car, grasping the roof for dear life when Uncle Johnny scolded him. "No, tú no sabes, tú no vas. You don't know, you don't go." And I could see all his anger and resentment in that sentence. I realized right then and there how his brothers and sisters treat him. The slow one. I think it's because of the frustration he caused them. They were the ones who had to take over the responsibilities, even though they were younger, because he couldn't help. He is treated this way by them. Uncle Joe can be stubborn and selfish at times. He doesn't share his electronics. That's his personality. Uncle Joe is my mom's older brother. He is the oldest, but he isn't treated with any kind of respect like the elders in the family. I call him Uncle Joe in English and Tío Jose in Spanish. When I visit my grandpa's house, I greet him with a big hug. I tell him about school. I show him my camera. He lurks around as I write in my notebook. He asks me curious questions. He asks me if I can write his name in my notebook, and I write real big, Jose Herrera, Jose Herrera, Jose Herrera. Thank you.
Thank you, Maribel. Early in the process of curating this program, I spoke to Soiled Magazine and requested a suggestion for a writer or two, and they recommended Maribel, and I said yes, of course, and I was so happy that she was here tonight. Thank you. I should take this moment before our last reader for the evening to remind you that Soiled Magazine does have some issues over here, including the brand new window scrapers. They also have some swag, so if you're not picking up a magazine, pick up the swag and check out their website. Really good stuff. I also want to thank Kevin, our volunteer, and he will be more than happy to help you get your name on our email list so you can win free walking tours of Chicago from Chicago Architecture Foundation. And you will also learn more about what the Guild Literary Complex is doing all across town. We normally don't do outside events, but it's turned into a beautiful evening, and I'm so grateful and thankful for all of you to be here with us tonight. So thank you for that. Sarah Ross, our final reader, is an artist and organizer. She is a co-organizer of the Prison and Neighborhood Arts Project, a new arts and humanities initiative at Stateville Prison. She is the recipient of grants from the Propeller Fund, Graham Foundation, and the University of California Institute for Research in the Arts. Ross's work in sculpture, video, and photo visualizes struggles around space, class, access, and gender. Please welcome Sarah Ross.
So I'm going to read about two distinct places. Sorry. I'm going to read about two distinct places and the ability for people who inhabit them to make sense of their space. Place 1. According to the Community Association Institute, Over 63 million Americans have lived or currently live in common interest developments, or CIDs. Common interest developments include gated communities, master planned or intentional communities, townhomes, and condominiums. The majority of common interest developments are located in suburbs, and by 2005, 7 million common interest development dwellers lived in gated communities. That is, about 4 million of them. It's not high enough? Okay. That is, about 4 million of them are in communities where access is controlled by gates, entry codes, key cards, or security guards. Common is what many common interest development dwellers like about their communities. Residents often say that they leave the city to live in a safe neighborhood where they know their neighbors and where their kids can play in the streets. How the common is defined and enforced is often through a simple and vertical form of governance. In many cases, when a buyer purchases a home, she also buys membership to a homeowners association, or a HOA. These regulatory bodies care for common property in the common interest developments, such as streetlights or recreation facilities. By becoming a member, the new owner agrees to follow the rules of the common interest development and pays dues to the organization for services like private security, landscaping, or waste removal. The Homeowners Association Board also follows and enforces rules written by the developer called deed restrictions or restrictive covenants. These rules legislate how the land can be used after the home or the unit has been purchased. The goal here is to ensure that the common interest development retains a specific demographic, an aesthetic standard, and a level of security. One rule on which many early common interest developments were built, that of racial segregation, was finally struck down in the courts by 1948 in Shelley versus Kramer, after more than 30 years of struggle. Thus, developments today are often not racially segregated. However, once the deed restrictions are set, the HOA board can create new rules and regulations as a community sees fit. Examples of these rules can include age commonality, for example, only residents over 65, a square foot minimum, meaning large houses only, landscaping mandates, meaning no food gardens or no fruit trees, vehicle limits, like no work trucks, home business restrictions, pet weight limits, exterior paint and material mandates, yard sign restrictions, and so on. In common interest developments, rules unite residents, functioning as a common denominator for the whole community. Fear of abstract crime, potential for change, or varying cultural values drive residents to create, abide by, and enforce rules that superficially prevent such contingencies. In this way, CID members render or draw their own communities based not only what common facilities are shared among neighbors, but on commonality to oneself. Place 2. The Illinois Department of Corrections is a state agency responsible for confining, feeding, working, and monitoring approximately 48,000 men, women, and teenagers in the state's 48 adult prisons, boot camps, work camps, and transitional centers. Illinois residents pay just over $1.2 billion a year for the state to carry out various aspects of confinement. A small fraction of that budget goes to localized community prevention and drug treatment services. Most of the state's incarcerated population are not from the towns in which they're held captive. Over half are from the city and suburbs of Chicago. Many of the state's incarcerated population may have lived in racially integrated places before confinement, but now they live in largely homogeneous groups of black and brown men and women. I used to teach an art history class at one Illinois prison located in a small downstate town. In each class, we'd inevitably talk about Chicago. Students would bring in pictures sent by family members of Millennium Park, Washington Park, Humboldt Park, and various neighborhood scenes from around the city. Although students could have these pictures, maps of the city or the state are prohibited in prison. In class, we discuss Western art's centuries-long preoccupation with creating illusionistic space and realistic images. We'd study linear perspective, atmospheric perspective, chiaroscuro, foreshortening, and more. We look at the complex visual devices created to develop a three-dimensional illusion on a two-dimensional surface. We consider the deep desires to use art in the service of educating a population about the glories of God and the powers of the aristocracy. To supplement these discussions, I once gave an assignment to students to draw their room or their cell. Immediately, I got a huge uproar from the class. We can't do that. They won't let us. But I thought for sure, if it was a class assignment for education, it'd be okayed. So I stepped outside the class and I asked the officer on duty about the assignment. He explained, inmates aren't allowed to draw any room or building on prison grounds. Drawings would be understood as an attempt to escape. He said anyone found with such renderings would be sent to segregation. Each time I went to the prison for the class, the front gate officer looked through my papers and books, double-checking all my art history and media for security reasons. Sometimes I brought in postcards from art exhibitions, which often contain directional maps. The front gate officer would call her superior and sometimes her superior's superior to okay the map. They would allow the map if it contained partial information or if it was from a foreign country, but detailed information, close information, or even the sense of space that one gets from a God's eye view of the map, that's banned. In 18th century England, when John Howard advocated solitude and self-reflection as a form of criminal rehabilitation, he would never have imagined the future reaches of solitude. Today in Illinois, state corrections comes in the form of depopulating specific neighborhoods, dislocating inhabitants, and physically and psychically recreating spatial relationships. Thanks.
Thank you, Paul and Maribel and Sarah. Greatly appreciate you taking the time to tell us some stories, give us some histories, and some new ideas. Thank you all for coming tonight. This Broken Words episode is part of Applied Words, which is a series that the Gilded Literary Complex runs that looks at the intersection of writing and non-writing disciplines. So I hope that you enjoyed yourselves. I greatly appreciate you taking the time on this lovely evening to be with us. Please talk with our writers. Feel free to join our email list, and I look forward to seeing you at a future event. Thank you.